Liam Burns, President of the NUS, thanks so much for joining us today. You must be really, really busy.
Yeah, but it's looking good. We've seen a pile of student media so far. Everyone really excited about what we pull off today, so it's looking good.
Sure. So what exactly do you set to achieve from Demo 2012 today?
Sure. So look, we are now 2 years since 2010 general election, where because of the campaigning of students across the UK, we had a promise from Parliament that they wouldn't increase fees, and then they did exactly that. But we have 3 years on, we know that there's a general election in which we want people to be talking about the fact that tuition fees have trebled, that the money that poor kids in college had to get for a bus just to get to college has been taken away from them, that even if you're lucky enough to get in and through education now, the chance of employment is looking less and less likely.
Okay, thanks for that. And I mean, you talk a lot about 2010 and the incumbent government, but I mean, would you not argue that all politicians, past and present, had a role to play in kind of breaking promises about tuition fees and higher education?
I wouldn't argue, I'd agree. So it's not as if tuition fees popped up overnight in 2010. This was, actually over the last 40 years, we've seen successive colours of government try to marketise education in different ways. Now, the point about 2010 was we'd never pulled off in the way we did such an explicit promise from politicians. They were holding cards that said, "I promise not to increase tuition fees." That felt like an electoral contract, and then to have MPs come in and do exactly that and then some, I think is the bit people are most angry about. I actually think it's fair to say that the pledge campaign that we run in 2010 has been commented by lots of people as one of the most effective general election campaigns in decades. But people were angry about that, not because of fees. I think there's probably people who agree with fees who are still angry about that. It's about how can you have a democracy, and one of the main moments in a democracy to exert power from people is an election, and yet that doesn't stand up anymore. You have a Deputy Prime Minister who apologises for making a promise, for making it, not breaking it. How are we meant to trust politicians anymore? And I think that's what's different about this demonstration. Part of it is about saying we remember what happened, but also what's different is we're saying we'll set the agenda this time rather than reacting to yours.
Sure. And so you also talked about the protests in 2010, and there were lots of successes in that protest. You know, we mustn't forget those, but also widely publicised were the failures. So what have you learned about those protests, and how do you reflect on those, and how are you going to kind of learn this time round?
Well, you're right to say there was a huge amount of successes. We had 50,000 people out on the streets in London. The vast majority peacefully and really effectively protested and made their point, and that led to lots of concessions in the current tuition fees regime. But you'd be right to point out that there was violence within Millbank that we were quite clear that we didn't agree with as the National Union of Students, and student unions didn't either. What we've done differently this time, well actually we've not done things differently because we had prepared everything we could last time, but we certainly have sent very clear messages before the demonstration this time around that we want an effective protest but also a peaceful one, and that's something that student unions have signed up to wholesale. This is a starter gun for campaigns up and down the country on local campuses, whether that be in MPs' offices or whether that be where the Vice-Chancellor sits. The point is that this is one tactic in a broad campaign, and that's what I'm really excited about starting today.
Why are you here today?
I think I said it already. Shan wants to bring background, but the rest of us are here to educate, employ and empower. It's vital that we get the message across, even if the government ignore it like they normally do. We hate fees, we want EMA back, we want to give young people a better chance. So, yeah.
It's getting more difficult for students to actually take part in education simply because that it should be about you have the right to learn rather than the right to pay for your education.
And who are you most angry at about these reforms?
The Tories.
Tories?
Then Nick Clegg turned his back on on us. He's so turned his back on us. So, yeah.
And what do you think is going to come out of this protest?
Probably nothing immediately, but hopefully they'll understand what twats have been in the long run, and in the next election Tories won't get in.
Well, it's a bit ridiculous that youth employment is like 1 in 4 young people is unemployed these days, which is ridiculous for students that are going out, choosing to go to education, and they're wanting to make a difference to their lives, to provide for their families, and they're not getting that chance.
So clearly you're angry and frustrated. Are those frustrations directed at any particular people?
I think it's probably the people that are all on these posters, to be honest.
Sure.
Yeah. Didn't happen under the Labour regime, so yeah, it's obviously going to go down to them. But I mean, we're just here today to join with everyone else and make sure that something actually changes. So I mean, protest a lot of the time doesn't actually get anywhere, but we're hoping with this one it actually does.
It's a really important thing for people to be able to feel like they can change the world. And in terms of employment, we're sitting on some of the worst youth employment figures we've ever seen. And it's clear that cutting jobs in the public sector isn't stimulating growth in the private sector. If anything, it's plunging us further into a recession, making more people unemployed. I mean, how are we supposed to pay £9,000 a year and then come out into a world where we can't get a job unless we fork out another 10, 15k on postgraduate qualifications? It doesn't make sense.
Sure. So in relation to empowering, you said it's important that people feel like they're making a difference here today, but are they actually making a difference?
I think if you feel like you make a difference, then you actually show up, and if you show up, then you can make a difference. It's a case of getting enough people in this country to feel like they, by showing up to protest, by voicing their dissent, actually have an impact, and if they feel that, then they will.
My name's Aaron Kiley, I'm the NUS Black Students Officer, and I represent over 1 million students of African, Arab, Asian, Caribbean heritage in Britain.
Sure. Okay, and so why is everybody demonstrating today?
Everyone's demonstrating today because people are very, very angry about consistent attacks on education. For example, £9,000 tuition fees, the loss of EMA, which people are coming here today talking about saying they lost their EMA 2 years ago, and now they're actually here on their first demonstration to raise opposition to, a loss like that.
And who do you blame for that?
I think the Tories have a lot to blame for. I think that, obviously the coalition government have carried out exactly what they want to do. I think it's an attack on education. It's an attack on, the majority of society, actually, because education is something that can give so much value to loads of people. So to cut things like EMA, adult learning grant, to treble tuition fees is really setting back, the chances of our generation.
But there are other themes relevant here, aren't there? Like employment and empowerment. So what do you say in relation to those things, aside from the education front?
Well, in terms of employment, I mean, you look at it, 50% of young black people are unemployed at the moment. It's an absolute disgrace. You go to university or you can go to college, there's no jobs really out there for many young people. And, when it comes to empowerment, I think it's very disempowering to have a government that consistently attacks the best things about society, like education, like the NHS. And, it's up to students as well. We have to go out and mobilise, we have to protest, we have to vote, we have to actually engage in the political process and challenge exactly what's happening and put forward what our positive alternative is. And to me, that's free education and bringing back living grants. I think the student movement should unite and fight for that.
So, Aaron, you've got all your objectives. Do you think you're going to be successful? Is any change going to come out of today?
Well, I think that this is a struggle for for the future of education. No struggle is ever easy, but it's actually worthwhile fighting because we're actually standing here defending the majority of society in the interests of future generations to come. So, I think it's definitely worthwhile. I can't tell you that we're going to have free education tomorrow or the next day, next week, next month. But hopefully in the future we're actually in a situation where we do have a better system for everyone.
Right, so we've heard from Liam Burns, the President of the National Union of Students, and we've heard from lots of demonstrators here today. But the question is, will this demonstration really make a difference? We'll have to wait and see.